En Estados Unidos. Ha publicado 7 libros, entre los que destacan Media Work y Media Life. Su presentación se titula Más allá del periodismo, Beyond Journalism. So, Professor Deuze, the floor is yours.
There it is. Good morning, everybody. I apologize for not being able to speak Spanish. Si yo no hablo español. So I'll do it on English. I want to talk today, first of all, thanks very much for having me here. I had the luxury of being, the university took us around the city yesterday, so we saw the entire city in the rain. It was beautiful. It's my first time here, so I'm very excited to be in the Basque Country and to be here. I want to talk today about a couple of things. 2 things in particular that I hope will kick off this conference for us. First, I'll talk a little bit about the role of journalism in the context of media life. Media life is the title of my last book. There it is, Media Life. And the argument in that book is that we don't live with media, but in media. And I'll try to explain what that means. Secondly, I'll talk about the identity of a journalist. Not just who is a journalist today, but how can a journalist think of him or herself in the current age of, like the speakers this morning say, active audiences, digital journalism, cyber journalism, and nobody makes any money. How can you think of yourself as a journalist in that particular context? And I think finally I'll try to end, if I have enough time, with some advice or a thought about where journalism is heading. And I think in order to understand journalism in the future, we need to go beyond journalism. So that's going to be my talk. So first, journalism and media life. Again, this is an argument that I developed in this particular book. And I thought the best way to explain this book to you is by telling you something that happened last night. So last night I was here at Café Antioquia. Is that how yes? Is that okay? And I was at this concert of this band. And the interesting thing is, Irati told you that I'm at the University of Amsterdam right now, but until last summer, the last 8 years, I was a professor at Indiana University in the United States. And at that university, I taught a course on media management. And one of my best students in that course ever, was about 6 years ago, is this guy. His name is Parker. And he is now the singer and guitarist of a band called Starkill, and they're on a world tour, and by accident he was playing in Bilbao last night. So of course I emailed Parker and he was like, your old professor is in town, and so I got into the concert. There they are, a bit more up close and personal. That's their band, Starkill. They're very cool. And it was a great time. It was lovely to see my old student. It's a wonderful venue. It's a really great concert venue. And so you should know I'm 44. I'm really old. But about 20 years ago, I looked like that. I had long hair and like metal and all that kind of stuff. So I felt very young for a moment. But more importantly, something happened at that concert that I'm going to show you that I think you all recognize. And I think it's typical of living in media. And that's this. I hope you can see it. So there they are, Parker and Tony, the other guitarists, shredding on their guitars, right? But look what happens to the audience. Everybody in front was standing there with a camera, right? I don't know if you go to metal concerts, but in metal concert, when you're in the front, you should be like banging each other in the face and jumping up and down and doing like this. And nobody. People were either standing like this or filming. Now, traditionally in media studies, we would say, this is bad. People don't spend time in real life anymore. They only spend time on their screens. And even when they are participating in real life, they're actually participating through media. However, you could also think of it differently. These people are absolutely there and they're participating in the real world. But at the same time, they're editing that world. Right? They're recording something of that world with the intention to share it later. Because I didn't take the next picture, but the next picture, of course, is people putting down their cameras and then going online to Twitter and Foursquare to share what they were just seeing. In other words, to edit the reality of the experience that they're participating in. It's not that they're disconnected from reality, it's that they're changing that reality. That's the point here. Media don't come in between them and reality. Media offer them a role in reality that is the role of an editor or a co-author. And I'll show you, I'll give you evidence. Because what was I doing where my friend was doing his thing? Now I don't have long hair anymore, so me doing this looks just silly. But so I did, of course, I was taking pictures like everybody else. And then I did this. You know, I checked in on Foursquare at Cafe Antioquia for Amorphis and Starkill, like just here to see Star, like. And then, of course, I went on Twitter and tweeted the picture that I just took and say Starkill is killing it, tried to be funny. And then, of course, I did the same on Facebook. And I tagged the picture with the name of my friend, Parker Jameson. So then he could later on, as you can see, Parker Jameson likes this. He came off stage, opened his phone, liked the picture of himself 5 minutes ago on stage. So here we are collaboratively authoring, producing reality. Does that make us less participatory of that reality? Does it make us less real? We're not really there? No, it makes us more there than there can ever be. And this to me is what essentially a way to understand how we live in media today. And I think it's for me at least, it's a gateway to understanding all kinds of issues, including the issue that we're going to talk about today and tomorrow. So we live in media. Now, I gave you a personal example of what happened last night, and it got late, so I apologize if I'm weird. Let me also illustrate it with a couple of examples that I hope you all recognize from your everyday life. Because of course a theory only works insofar it can be made practical, right? If it connects to the real world. So in order to tell you, to convince you that you don't live with media but in media anymore, I'm first going to define media in 3 ways. The first way is that when I talk about media, when we talk about media, we always talk about 3 things at the same time. First, we talk about media as artifacts, right? As devices. This computer, your phone, the camera, this camera right here, wires, microphones, television screens, chips, bits, pixels, all that kind of stuff. Those are media, all of that is media, and there are artifacts, the things we use. Secondly, media are activities, stuff that we do with these artifacts. Think about what kind of words we use to describe our media activities. Zapping, zipping, clicking, liking, recommending, forwarding, downloading, uploading, remixing, sharing. These are all very active verbs. We do stuff. So media are artifacts, the things we use. Media activities, what we do when we use these things. And finally, media are social arrangements, which means media are part and parcel of the way we organize our life. The nice and best example of that is, I don't know if you, some of you may have gone out into the city last night or Saturday night. And let's say you were supposed to meet your friends at 8 p.m. at the Cafe Antioquia. You all know what's going to happen around about 7:55. You get a text, I'm in the bus, I'll be 5 minutes late. 7:56, a text from somebody else, I'm on my way. 8:02, I'm outside for my last cigarette. And like this incessant traffic, coordinating everybody's presence and where everybody's at and going. And so this 8 p.m. is really an hour long of micro-coordination with your phone to see where everybody is and where we're going. And that's a nice example of how media structure and organize something as mundane and simple as going out for a drink with your friends. So first of all, how can we see in our artifacts, in our laptops and our smartphones, that we live in them and not with them? That seems like a weird argument, right? Because of course I don't live in this device. I can walk away. I don't live in it. It's easy, right? I don't think it is that easy. So let me explore this argument for a little bit. You know, well, not all of you know this, but some of you, old people like me, know what this is, right? It's a phone, a telephone. And this is how telephones up until not so long ago were, right? These are rather big devices, heavy. They often were always at the same place in every house. You would go to somebody's house and there was like a table or like a little cove in the hallway where this phone was. And the entire area was dedicated to this phone. Maybe a little chair next to it if you have a long phone call. And if you wanted to make a call, you had to put your finger in these circles and press and then dial. And that hurts, right? I mean, if you put your phone, especially if you have long nails, and it hurts. So if you have friends with lots of 9s in their phone number, you would never call them because it's like all the way down and up. It's like, to hell with them. I'll just call people who have 1s and 0s. It was a phone. It made noise like you did. Like you can now get an app for your smartphone that sounds like it, right? Because it's or these ringtones that sound like this phone. They're kind of cool, right? Old school ringtones. It's a phone. There's only one thing you can do with this thing. It's like make a call or receive one. It's a phone. So what is a phone today? Well, this is a phone, right? But wait a minute, how do I know that this is a phone? It's just a piece of plastic. It's not just it's kind of warm, and it has these rounded shapes. It's kind of like slides in your hand and in your pocket. And if you buy clothes now, they have these little pockets down here that are made for your phone to disappear onto your body so that it buzzes. It gives you a nice little thing. And you can speak to it softly and it does things for you. Right? Or you stroke it like you do your partner when you want him or her to do something nice. Right? Darling, could you get me a beer? Right? Or a soda, whatever. And of course, yeah, it's a phone, but statistics show we don't really use this thing to make calls. We primarily use this to go online, to check Facebook or other social media, to text, obviously, and to check our email, to watch movies and television, to surf the web, to play video games. The phone has disappeared into this black hole that is very close and intimate to you and your body and your... I don't know if you've ever seen this on Facebook, like groups or messages from your friends that say, help, I lost my phone, I need your numbers. What happens when you lose something like, look, you can't lose this, right? But this, we lose it all the time. And we freak out. We go in a state of shock. We feel disconnected from the world. We get cold sweats. It's very dangerous. So the phone, and that's why I was using this tag, the phone has disappeared. It has fused with other media. It has become this very intimate device. And it is also fused with all kinds of other devices that in them of themselves have also disappeared, right? I mean, this is not a game console, this is not a television screen. This is not a personal computer. It's all of that and it's therefore none of that. It has disappeared. The phone is gone. You may have seen this earlier this year, the introduction of the new Samsung Galaxy phone. It's not called a phone anymore, is it? It's a life companion. It's your buddy. It's your friend. It's your pal. It's definitely not a device anymore. It's a living and breathing thing that is part of you. Now, another device that almost everybody on the planet has or has access to. This is a television, or it used to be, right? In the 1940s and 50s. Televisions with round screens. That's insane, but it's pretty cool. But look at this television. First of all, you have like two knobs, big clunky, very irritating. And then, I don't know if you remember this, but the first remote controls that came out, they were called like a Sky Commander, like obviously intended for men, because who else wants to be a Sky Commander when you watch television? But they didn't have off switches. Right? You couldn't switch them off. You still can't actually try to switch off your television. It's really impossible. But anyways, so this is television. Look at the television. You know what it is? It's disguised as furniture. Right? It's big. It's like a big wooden cabinet. It's like it fits. I mean, it takes over a significant chunk of your house. The interesting thing is that television changed interior architecture of housing. Housing that was built after the 1950s. For example, I'm not quite sure how this is in Spain or in the Basque Country, but in a lot of Western countries, houses that were built after the 1950s had open plan kitchens. So kitchens today are open. They are not this little room in the back. Older houses, yes, of course, but newer houses, they're open. The reason for that was so that housewives could watch television while cooking. That's the reason why we have open plan kitchens. So I mean, it's horrible, but that's the way people were thinking at the time, and it's still very much part of the way of the design of our houses today. But yes, it's a big device taking up big space in your house, and you sort of build your life around this device. So this is the new Panasonic television marketing campaign. This is a television where you live in the television. It's high definition, 3D. It is real. And the thing with these high definition televisions that we now buy today is that they are, look, I don't know if you know this from neuroscience, but our brains cannot comprehend high definition information. So when we see a high definition screen, we think, oh, the resolution is amazing, it's so sharp. No, we don't. We imagine it to be, because our brain, when confronted with all these pixels, just go like smoke comes out of your ears. And what we do when we are confronted with things that we cannot process is we focus on a tiny detail on the screen and imagine the rest around it. And that's why the screen seems so sharp. Not because our brain can comprehend 1080p or whatever it's called, but because it gets tricked into believing that the entire image is bright and sharp. So we can actually not see high-definition television. So in a quite literal biological sense, high-definition television makes the television disappear. But there's another thing going on with high-definition television. This is a television also by Panasonic, there you can see the logo, that was patented and introduced in 2006, 7 years ago. This device is a television the size of the wall of your house. So the entire wall is a television. It's called the Life Wall. That's the patented name of this technology. And what it is, as you can see, it's an entire wall, it's a television. The wall has built-in remote sensing cameras that sees who's in front of the television and then displays on the wall what that person most likely wants to see, because it knows you. The technology behind this is patented by Panasonic as called You Know Me television. One word, You Know Me television. So the television sort of disappears into the entire living environment of your home, and it gets to know you. And the new Samsung televisions come with chips in them that learn from your watching behavior and update themselves accordingly. Televisions they call smart evolution chips. Evolution, life. This is normal now, right? We jump up and down in front of a screen and we expect things to happen. This is entirely normal. This is us being remote controls and joysticks. Like we have become Sky Commander. We are devices ourselves. Our device, like the smartphone, isn't just this close, intimate device that we carry on our body. Our body itself has become a media artifact. Finally, again from a marketing campaign earlier this year, you probably noticed, if you're a gamer, the new Xbox has been introduced, put on the market, the Xbox One. How is the Xbox One sold to us? As a really great game console? No. It's sold to us on the basis of 3 key properties, claims that this device makes about us. Real voice, real motion, real vision. Real. When you access the world through the Xbox One, it becomes real. This for me is really fascinating. And this is not just marketing speak. I mean, it connects to a feeling we have when we interact with our media artifacts, that through our artifacts, we actually are alive and become real, and reality becomes more alive and real accordingly. The television and the phone, that's the point of this, in that sense, as technologies, discrete, distinct technologies, disappear. They become ambient, they become part of our living environment, and they make the environment real. And they make us come alive. That's how we perceive them, that's how we feel them, I would almost say. So that's how you can see that you live in media, simply by looking at 2 very simple devices. Now, I said furthermore that media are things that we do, right? Media are activities. So in this space where media disappear from us, what do we actually do with them? I mean, you can think about that for a moment, but I want to share a little bit of research with you. This is a research done, it's called the Middletown Media Studies, as you can see here. And it's done by a university in the United States called Ball State University. It's a university in Indiana, where I used to live, called Muncie. It's the village where the university is located. Small village. But what is interesting about Muncie, Indiana, is that it's Middletown America. And that means that statistically, it's a perfect representation of the entire country. So the average number of whites and blacks, men and women, high educated, low educated, rich and poor, old and young people in that town match exactly the composition of the entire country. So it's a very popular town to do research in, because it's easy to generalize from that population. So these colleagues, they did a series of studies measuring how people use media. So I wanted to share the results of those studies with you, because they are very interesting. First of all, they called people on the phone and asked them, so how many hours do you watch TV a day or a week? How many hours do you read newspapers and magazines or books? How many hours do you spend surfing the web? And they calculated everything, and they ended up with about 4.8, let's say 5 hours a day people spend with media. That's okay, 5 hours out of 24, that's not too bad. Then they did a follow-up study where they asked people to keep a diary of their media use. So every half an hour people would write down what they've just been doing that involved media. And the 5 hours jumped to 9.5. Same people, same day, 100% different. That's crazy. Something must have gone wrong. So they did a third study. And this time they had people followed. Of course, with their consent. So students would take notepads and follow people around during the day and write down what they were doing with media. The 9.5 jumped to 11. 11 hours a day people spend with media. That's more time than sleeping. That means that in your life, you will spend most of your life with media. The interesting thing, though, is what explains the difference between the 4.8 hours originally and the 11 hours in the real world? Well, 2 things primarily. One, that we use multiple media at the same time, so we tend to forget. Yeah, I was reading a book, but I was also listening to music, right? The radio was on, but I was also sort of zapping through television or something like that. More importantly is that the more we use media, the more we're likely that we forget doing so. That's what's really going on. So the more we use media, the more time we spend with media, the less likely is it that we are aware that we spend time with media. We like to think that we know that we spend so much time on our computers or on our phones or on our televisions, but we don't. And it gets worse. Know what is really amazing about this study? Which was when it was conducted. 10 years ago. Right? This is before the iPod, just the same time as the iPod was introduced, but before the iPhone, before Facebook, before YouTube, before Twitter, before any of the things. Today, this number, 11 hours, is 11 and a half. It doesn't change. This is one of the biggest myths about new media, is that because of new media, we spend more time with media. No, we don't. We're just more likely to forget. And in that sense, you remember the conclusion I drew about media as artifacts, that they disappear? It's the same goes for our media as activities. They disappear. We forget. We just spend all this time with media, constantly immersed in increasingly intimate and sophisticated devices. And we just go, well, I don't know. It just happens to us. Even those of us who are very critical, oh no, this is not me. I am very deliberate about, no, you lie. I don't know if you watched the television show House here in Spain, but you remember what he says, everybody lies. Well, that's the first rule of research, right? Anybody you talk to, they're lying. It's very important to keep that in mind when you do social research. Anyways, this is a nice example, right? I mean, we just heard that the most popular hashtag is the one of the Pope. Well, this was when the Pope was announced in 2005, and this one was the last Pope was announced on the same square. Something changed, right? This is like the concert of my friends last night, right? So finally, what does this mean for media and the organization of our lives? Now, this is way too complicated to just spend 4 or 5 minutes on. So I'll just give you an example of something we've all experienced in the last 2 or 3 years. What is the most significant social event of the last couple of years that has dominated journalism and the world at large? I would say it's the emergence of all kinds of social movements that seem to escape our definitions of social movements. Traditionally, when we think of social movements, we think of political parties and unions, or students that protest rising costs. Those are social movements. We can define them. They have logos and representatives, and they are organized, and they have clear goals and messages. But what has happened in the last couple of years? Well, think about this. Some of the revolutions in Eastern Europe, World Trade Organization protests in Seattle, the White March in 1996. I don't know if you remember this, probably not. But this was a spontaneous eruption of mass protest in Belgium because there was a man was being tried at the time for murdering it's a horrible story, murdering children, and the trial was just a nightmare. It was a horrible, horrible nightmare. And people were so upset with the system that they just walked onto the street with these white balloons, spontaneously. So it was this very mediagenic moment of people that politically had very different opinions, but all got together randomly, briefly, to protest passionately something that was happening in their lives. What about the Arab Spring, right? This is Egypt, Cairo, 2 years ago. And you've seen these pictures. And you probably have also seen that every third person on this picture is using a device, right? You see it here, 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 there, everybody. Right? Everybody's recording, sharing, participating, remixing, forwarding, liking, recommending, and so forth and so forth. And these people don't agree with each other. The simple fact that there were men and women demonstrating side by side is incredible. And it was only temporary, right? But still. So temporarily, very passionate, often endangering their own lives, people got together and protested, made something happen. Of course, here in Spain, the Indignados movement is an interesting example of this too. Coordinating, if you could say coordinating, micro-coordinating through smartphones, through BlackBerry, to Twitter, through those kind of devices and technologies. The riots in London the year before the Olympics, the David Cameron government blamed the riots not on its own failed social system or policy, but on Twitter and BlackBerry, and started drafting a law that would enable the government to shut down the internet if people would protest. Right? That law is already in effect in the United States. So media are blamed for what's happening in the real world, which is an interesting mixture of media and life. Of course, the same Blackberries and Twitters were then later on used for people to clean up the mess that they made. But of course, that's conveniently forgotten. Occupy, the Occupy movement, cannot be disentangled for the role media played in it, right? Occupy started as a hashtag, we know the word now, 3 months before people actually started camping in downtown New York. Right? It lived in media before it lived anywhere else. What about Kony? Some of you may have participated in this. A worldwide social movement that never actually happened in the real world. Or did it? Yes, it did. Of course it did. It was virtual and real at the same time. Now, what all these examples have in common is that they're unique in the way that they are organized. They bring together people from a wide variety of perspectives and ideas and social demographic backgrounds. They bring them together temporarily because they disappear as quickly as they rise up. They bring them together on the basis of very strong emotions, and they bring them together through the organization of personal mobile network devices. How do we know what is going on? How do we know where to congregate? How do we know how to avoid the police? And are they real, right? I have colleagues, sociologists, political scientists, who argue that none of this is real because none of this produces anything other than angry people, angry mobs. That's why a government like the David Cameron one in the UK is so angry with this. But they're real nonetheless. They have a massive impact in the way we look at the world. They are also a way of looking at the world. Why do all these people, why don't they just, vote for specific political parties? Because you know what's happening, people vote less and less and less. Why don't they join a union and protest that way? No, union membership is catastrophically low. But still we act. Why would we do this? I think it has to do with those disappearing media that I just talked about. I think my good friend and colleague in New York, Doug Rushkoff, he wrote this in 2003. And I think here's the key for me to understanding this. Is that living in media makes us aware that reality is open source. Now, what is interesting about this statement is the link between reality, we can feel it, we can see each other, we can shake hands later on, and open source, which, as you probably know, is a software term. It is a term for software that anybody can edit. Like some of you use Firefox as the browser to go online. That's open source. Anybody can edit Firefox. Most of the computer systems in the world run on open source software. IBM, Microsoft, they all use open source software to run their companies. Sony is another one. Open source is software, but according to Doug Rushkoff, it's reality. Or at least it's the way we experience reality in media. Or a better way to explain this, I forget this is funny, but I don't want to bore you with this, is this. I think this is the way we now look at the world, as a game that we can play, as software that we can edit, as a reality that we can participate in, not to consume it. Remember the concert that I started off with, people complaining that people with cameras in concerts are not really experiencing the concert? What you're complaining about is that they're not good consumers. Why the hell should we be consuming anything? Consuming is a very limited definition of the topic that we're talking about in this conference, which is an audience. We don't want to consume things, we want to be part of producing things. That comes natural to us as human beings. We make stuff. And our media today give us, well, let's say the illusion that we can make or edit anything, including reality when we look out the window. These examples, these were sort of things that earlier this year became memes online. You know what a meme is, a way of acting that you share online and get picked up everywhere and people spread it. Interesting, of course, a meme is a term that comes from biology, and this mixture of discourse of biology and technology is, again, emblematic or symptomatic of media life. But this has become very popular to do. It's called Hadokening. I don't know if you know this. Hadoken is a certain thing that you can do if you're a character in a video game Street Fighter or in Japanese manga movies. You press the air or the ground with so much force, then the people around you splatter apart. So this is a really smart way of taking a picture, of course. But if you look at these pictures online and you check the comments, well, you know what the comments say? Either, oh, this is stupid, or they say, don't you wish you could do that? Exactly. Deep down inside, be honest, you wish you could do that. Or this one is the American equivalent. It's called vadering. I love this one. This is a professor and a nasty student. Like, student comes complaining about their grade, you go like, you know, the force is strong with you. Yes. Or this one is called pottering. Harry Potter, right? You know, Quidditch and that kind of stuff. So it's, again, I don't know how they took that picture, but of course it's a way of using advanced cameras and then jumping and then. But don't you wish you could do that? Aren't most of the movies today in a way about this sort of us having direct intervention? It's not by accident that these kind of movies started to become popular by the late 1990s. Remember The Matrix? It's this direct intervention in the real, true technology that we think or believe or that we could make. So what is important here is that our media, by living in media, our media disappear. They become part of us, they become almost who we are, and in doing so, we start looking at reality as if we are media, as if we can edit, cut and paste, recommend, share, like, remix, move forward, move backward, fast forward, freeze time. Those are things that we almost expect of reality. And to me, that explains how people look at the world around them. And the problem, of course, of a media industry like journalism is that it's premised on people not looking at them as a collaborator or a co-author, but as consumers. But we don't consume anymore. Well, we still consume, but we do stuff with our consumption. The number one source of news for people is, for example, in the United States, people still read the New York Times, but they do it through recommendation links on Facebook and Twitter. Right? It's like, that's the way we intervene, we edit the newspaper for ourselves. That's one example of that. Oh. How does this relate to, I'll shut up quickly, but I want to finish the story. How does this relate to the identity of a journalist? What are you supposed to do with all of this? The thing is, and this is like, if you listen to professors or senior journalists explain what they have to do to deal with this unwilling consumer, generally what we say is we have to find ways to convince the consumer to come back to us. And the demands we put on journalists to come up with those ways of forcing this consumer back into the cage of consumption are incredible. They're impossible, really. Traditionally, so journalism has now become this, right? I mean, when we think about journalism, we think about and we see this. This is a typical newsroom of a major media organization. In this case, it's the Daily Telegraph in the UK. And these are multimedia organizations, right? They're a bit sort of scary in a way. They have these central desks where men decide what needs to happen, and then they send out orders through these lanes, and there's like foreign reporting here and online and culture and politics, and people sit behind machines and produce information, and it's very sort of, this is what we train journalists for in order to enter these spaces and participate in this nightmare. I mean, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been into a newsroom, but how many people do you see there smiling? I used to be a journalist, and then, I mean, I studied journalism because I thought it was the most fun and creative thing to do. And then I worked in journalism for 6 years, and I realized, oh my God, it's not. The same goes for academe, by the way, but that's beside the point. At least I can go to Bilbao and meet all these amazing people. Now, and of course, the problem is not so much about being a journalist. The problem is so much about what working in journalism has become. A colleague in the UK, David Hesmondhog, that some of you may know because he's written so much about what it's like to work in media, a couple of years ago wrote this book called Media Work and Creative Labor, Media Work in Three Cultural Industries, Journalism, Film and Television. And what he concluded after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people and doing many years of studies is that work in the media, including journalism, has shifted from being good work to being bad work. And that means that, good work is that you work and you get a decent wage with manageable working hours. Today, people get paid poorly and they work insane hours. People stop. The ability to have a family and work in the media is almost gone, unless you're very successful, which most people never are. You have to move around all the time. It's very difficult. That the workplace gives you creative autonomy, the freedom to do good work, to select your stories, to pursue them with passion. No, they don't. Right? Workplaces have become oppressive. People experience powerlessness. You talk to a journalist, they feel powerless to do anything that they really want to do. People are bored, feel isolated from their communities, from their peers. People are frustrated, low self-esteem, work-life balance is gone. People don't feel that they work to produce excellent products, but they increasingly have to sort of put water in their wine. Cannot really do what they feel like they should be doing, and that they feel that they don't produce work that contribute to the well-being of the common good. This is pretty depressing, right? What this means is not there's something wrong with being a journalist, or that a journalist is doing something wrong or bad. It means that there's something wrong with the system. There's something rotten in the state. And I think that one thing that is rotten is the way that journalism has become something, an organization, institution, that cannot see society anymore the way society sees itself. And like I just said, society sees itself as an editor, as a society that can be made, produced collaboratively by sharing, remixing, liking, and so on and so forth. Now, I'll tell you how this is taught to you. Some of you are students, I am assuming students of journalism as well. How do we teach journalism? How do we theorize journalism? Often like this. We make journalism out to be a system that on the outer layer, this is how it's taught in Germany, always a good starting point, that journalism is part of a media system which fulfills functions in society, and it has to live up to professional and ethical standards and media policies and all kinds of stuff. And then there's a layer of media institutions, right? Businesses that have economical imperatives, that are organized and structured a certain way, that use particular kind of technologies that determine what kind of journalism can be made. And then it has another layer that is about media forms, like a difference whether you work for television or online or print, for example, that again structure what you can do. And then at the end, when you finally plowed your way through these thick layers of things that journalism is supposed to be, there's the journalist. A man or a woman who has certain ideas and ideals, values, a certain age, a certain gender, and has some kind of idea of why he or she wants to be a journalist. And maybe that's important too. But really, this is journalism, all these layers. This is the same model how it's used in the United States, right? Media ideology, extra media forces. This is kind of the Death Star in Star Wars. Journalist routines, newsroom routines, and finally, we have journalists. I mean, even theoretically, you kind of feel like, Jesus, this is weight that is like you carry around. It's like your atlas, right? Maybe we should stop theorizing and teaching journalism this way. Maybe this actually makes journalists impossible, it gives them an impossible task to work through all of this and then be part of a society that looks at reality in such a fundamentally different way than the traditional way we think of when we think about production and consumption of media. So maybe we should just only look at this journalist, only at these human beings. Now, and this is not just me being sort of a utopian theorist, because I'm not sure about the statistics in Spain, but I don't think they're very different. In the Netherlands right now, 56% of all journalists don't work in newsrooms anymore. They're freelance, independent contractors, correspondents, all those kind of things, often unpaid, extended internships, those kind of things. And it's the same in most other countries in the world. International Labour Organization put out a report a couple of years ago labeling this new form of journalism atypical news work. Journalists aren't not typically employed anymore in journalism. They're sort of like, they're all sort of scattered and fragmented and on their own, precariously sort of waiting for a chance to produce content. A journalist isn't theoretically or shouldn't theoretically be on his or her own. In the real world, you're already on your own. And maybe that's a good thing. And that's what my final comment is really all about. Beyond Journalism, it's a title of a book I'm currently working on with a Dutch colleague, Tamara Witske. And it's about this new sort of form of journalism that comprises both of old and new journalisms, old and new media, young and old journalists that are on their own, but perhaps not necessarily powerless, but in fact perhaps even better empowered than any other form of journalism today to live in media like we all are doing. For me, and this is my concluding comment, for me, if you want to sort of make this all practical, what kind of journalist is best suited? What kind of identity does a journalist have to really be part of a society that lives in media and where audiences are by their very nature active, not because they sometimes upload a video to YouTube, but because the way they look at the world. And this is important, right? An active audience is not necessarily linked to being technologically savvy. It's actually linked to a way of looking at the world. The kid in front of the window, this is the worst game ever. The best professional model or identity model for a journalist, I think, is that of a DJ, a disc jockey, like this young woman. Forget this, I don't have enough time. But what does a DJ do? What does a DJ do better than any other professional? And it's all these kind of things. A DJ tells stories across multiple media, right? They use digital media, analog media, they use vinyl, they play in clubs, they put out records, they are online. Not just the famous DJs like this one is Tiesto, he's Dutch, yay. I hate techno because I'm into metal, but I will use it anyway. A DJ has to secure autonomy, like any journalist, but he or she has to do that for himself. Right? Autonomy is not something that is given to you by the newsroom that you have to be thankful for, but it's autonomy that's something that you define for you. What does autonomy mean to you? If you're studying to be a journalist, have you ever thought about that? Not just what autonomy is or should be, but what it means to you. When are you autonomous in your role as a storyteller? You're not just a maker, like you make news, you write stories, you put out packages, video, audio. You produce media. And producing is something very different than making. Producing is considering the entire media environment, including your audience, in making something. That's why producers at the Oscars are the last ones. Have you ever noticed this? The Oscars are coming up again. Who is the last person who gets an Oscar? The most important person in Hollywood? Producer. Best movie award is producers, right? All the other people, the actors, the directors, insignificant. They're puppets on the strings of the producers. That's why being a producer is a much more powerful role than being a maker, something journalists often forget. Peer community and public community, right? A journalist tends to have a peer community by definition because you're part of a newsroom, right? You walk into the newsroom, people tap you on the back, great story in yesterday's newspaper, go forth. But what if you're not in a newsroom anymore? Where do you find your peers? Café Antokia, probably, I don't know, at the bar. But that's not an unimportant. How do you create your own peer community? How do you get together with your friends who are also journalists? How many of you have journalist friends in other countries? If the answer is 0, that's a problem. Because it's so easy to make friends internationally. Attending a conference like this is the best thing you can do for yourself. And connect with the people around you. That's your peer community. The newsroom, not so. Not anymore. Makers as brands. Brand yourself. Right? Be someone that is not necessarily tied to a title, like the title of a newspaper or a television station, but who you are. Why should people come to you for their reporting? These kind of verbs, curating, editing, moderating, validating, animating, inspiring, are terms that are used. As you can see, what I don't put here is reporting, writing. That's important still, but those are verbs strictly limited to the act of making. But the act of being part of a peer and public community, of producing, of being part in people's lives that are lived in media, includes these kind of verbs. Do you know what these are and how you can do that? It's an interesting challenge. And finally, being both tactical and strategic. What that means, a famous book by French philosopher Michel de Certeau, The Practice of Everyday Life, talks about this, that in order to live in a world, we are both tactical and strategic. Strategic means that we look at journalism as a system and strategically position ourselves in it. How do we get a job? Right? A student, if you ask your professor, how do I get a job in journalism? What courses should I take to get a job? You're being strategic. Tactical means you find ways to move in and through the system on your own without ever necessarily having to be part of that system. It's much harder, right? This is not easy, but it's an interesting challenge, I think, and it's a creative challenge. So a DJ as the professional identity model for journalism that goes beyond itself, beyond that layered structure, and can actually be part of life as lived in media. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Professor Deuze, for your witty presentation. No sé si tenéis alguna pregunta o comentario. Podéis hacerlos en castellano, euskeras, en inglés. Os pasamos el micrófono. Yeah.
Sí. Bueno, gracias. Pues si no hay otro que quiere preguntar, le voy a hacer la pregunta en inglés para que comprenda mejor. That was a fabulous presentation. There's a lot to think about there. I just want to play a little bit with this idea of the media disappearing and rather turn that around to ask you whether we are disappearing into the media. And to what extent we are living that simulacra,
right,
that life, which is all through images. And yeah, I mean, you were very convincing about how the real is something that we're now interpreting and curating and editing. Like I agree, I buy all that. Mm-hmm. But still, when we did get to those places where people were actors, social actors with media, we were looking at fairly spectacular forms of resistance, like these mega events around the world, which also play very easily into some sort of a media simulation. Like here they are.
Right.
And they're also, in the case of Cairo and Egypt, they are part also of the world that's evolving. The media. Ahora? Vale. No.
Maybe there's a time limit on these questions. That would be horrible. I'm sorry, but this is a very good point. I mean, to what extent? Muchas gracias for your question. Media disappear. To what extent are we disappearing in media? Now, forgive me for taking two interpretations of the question. The first one would be that it's a critical question in the sense that are we losing ourselves in media, right? Are we giving something up by disappearing into media, and media disappearing into us and into our environment? I appreciate the concern. However, I would challenge it in the sense that I don't think there's anything we do in media that we're not doing outside of media. And to that effect, I would argue that the only thing that I'm arguing that perhaps is new is the fact that the technologies that each of us now uses makes us aware that we are living in media. But I think we've always lived in media. A famous American professor, Neil Postman, once argued that our languages are our media. Right? In other words, that the first time human beings developed language, we started living in media. We stopped communicating by just sort of like pushing each other around or throwing stuff at each other like, you know, apes do. We started to come up with grunts and then later on words to communicate complex messages because our societies got bigger. And so from that moment on, we started to fake it, to become actors, to start editing the world around us, to assume, to presume, to stereotype, to label, to all that kind of thing. I mean, people who would argue, for example, that by living in media, we start censoring ourselves. People's Facebook profiles aren't real. They're too neat, too nice. And that's true. However, think about what you did this morning before you came here. How many of you look now, the way you look now, how many of you look the same way when you got out of bed at 7 a.m.? Nobody. Maybe me, because I came directly from the club. But I'm wearing a clean T-shirt. Don't worry. But that's right. We take a shower. We put on makeup and body lotions and little right and all that kind of stuff. We lie. We fake. We censor. We edit. And it's a very normal human thing to do. There's nothing bad or wrong about it. When you communicate with your partner or your potential future partner, you lie non-stop, right? And not because it's not deliberate, like you're strategic. Well, some of us do. They're scary narcissists. But most of us, it's just it's very hard to say what you really mean or feel. And in media, it's no different. The only difference is that we can now see each other do this. It's like we can't hide behind anything anymore. So in a way. And this is an argument made by a Dutch philosopher, Peter Valverbeek. He argues that if we stop thinking about technology as this scary other that we disappear in, which is a valid concern, obviously, but become okay with losing ourselves to technology, we can actually see technology for what it is, as part of us. And through technology, we have all kinds of new ways and more interesting ways, perhaps even more real ways, to really experience the world and tell stories in the world and be in the world. I find that a very interesting argument, and I don't agree that, and I'm sure that's not what you're suggesting, that by submitting to technology, technology will take us over and we'll become Terminators or robots or something like that, or the robots will win. I think that is a typical sort of fantasy in science fiction that actually, I'm sorry, can I have one more minute? Yes, sir. This is a cool story. I don't know if you know this, but you know where this idea for the Terminator movies comes from? It came from the first written response to Charles Darwin's book, On the Origin of Species. You remember Charles Darwin, right? Evolution and all that kind of stuff, and we're all monkeys, and which makes Americans up to this day very, very, very scared, at least some of them. So his book was published in, what was it, 1850 something? In 1863, 3 letters appeared in a newspaper in New Zealand called The Reasoner. And those letters were about the implications of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution for the evolution of technology. And it was called Darwin's War Against the Machines. And the idea here was, it was written by an old childhood friend of Darwin, Samuel Butler, who went through the same school that was led by Darwin's grandfather. But he was very religious, and Darwin obviously was religious too, but he lost it by doing his research. And in these letters he says, well, if Darwin is right about evolution, then I have to interpret the evolution of clocks to wristwatches, which was happening at that time, as the first step to the wristwatches moving into our bodies and taking us over, and then destroying us in the process. We will lose ourselves to technology. The only solution, I'm quoting, is to wage war on the machines. This is basically the script of the Terminator movies. And that's where in the literature, the first concerns about technology, losing ourselves in started, was in the middle of the 19th century. Edgar Allan Poe wrote about this too. About men who went to war and came back and were constructed out of mechanical body parts. And they were robots. And they were scary and perfect. And that's what we would all become. Edgar Allan Poe, right? So that's the time where, and my argument would be is that that's also the time when we started to get really intimate with our technologies. Technology really became part of our everyday lives. And it started in the 19th century, then accelerated in the 20th, and today we cannot see a life outside of technology anymore. And my argument is not that that's scary or dangerous. It's by seeing that what it does to us is not make us slaves to technology, but gives us an editor's role in reality. We can actually participate in the world in a much more empowered way. We're not consumers anymore, or citizens, where we can only participate in the world by voting or buying, but we can write the future. It also gives us much more responsibility. We actually have to do something. And I think we're already doing. That's what Indignado stands for. That's what Planet Occupy stands for. Yeah. Sorry for the long answer.
No, don't worry.
Get carried away.
Thank you. No sé si hay alguna otra pregunta. Rápida. Vale, muy bien. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for your speech.